Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Gazelli Art House, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to discuss quite a very kind of hefty, quite a strong, not strong, but maybe a difficult to a certain degree topic. There's definitely a lot to discuss around it, but basically building on a new art marketplace in emerging economies. Before we dive into it and get to the bottom of what it really takes to build a successful and thriving art market in an emerging economy, I wanted to touch on the reason for this discussion and why we're holding this in the context of this kind of exhibition, which is called shey, qayidacaq. Which in Azeri translates what goes around comes around. So the exhibition brings both modern and contemporary artists from the region, from Azerbaijan, but also from Russia. So we've got Mikhail Abdullayev and Gennady Brezhnetyuk, two artists who are no longer alive and whose works date back to, at least that are exhibited here, date back to late 60s and mid 80s. Contemporary artist Aida Mahmudova, who's very much kind of alive in her mid 30s, and Russia's contemporary artist, performance artist Fyodor Pavlov Andreevich, whose works are upstairs. So this is generally kind of a key exhibition for the gallery, as it's the first time ever since opening in London that in 2010 that we've held an exhibition of artists from that region. We're hoping this is just the beginning of opening the doors to that part of the world generally. We aim to host several of these regularly, of these kind of exhibitions on a commercial level, on a level that allows both local and international audience to kind of interact, engage, exchange, most importantly, with the region out there, but not only kind of Central Asia or the Caucasus, but generally the idea of emerging markets, emerging art markets. So as a result, this kind of topic came about. Also a quick note, in Baku, where we have a second space, we're currently hosting an exhibition of it's called Domestic Alien, which showcases artists who are quite kind of internationally recognized and prominent. We've got Elena Tsui, Michelangelo Pistoletto, Franz Ackerman, Richard Wilson, artists who have a very strong kind of market recognition, but who haven't been shown in the region yet. So that just generally alone, that kind of, for the first time, bringing the two spaces in a way together and doing that exchange program to a certain degree opened quite a bit of kind of questions for us in terms of how to build on which is something I'm hoping to address tonight with our lovely kind of panelists, who I'll introduce and shut up for the rest of the time. But the kind of questions for us to tackle tonight as well. How to build on a sustainable private and public infrastructure to enable a flourishing art market in emerging economies, how to build successful collector bases both within these markets and externally, which is what we were just talking upstairs about, encouraging expenditure both locally and abroad. The pros and cons of that. Pricing, which is something, again, I personally tackled or came across when this show came about. The correct pricing of both modern and contemporary artists from this region when they're exhibited, when these artists are exhibited for the first time outside. The idea of artist estates, the protection of artist legacies, again, within these emerging art markets, creation of art fairs. The one coming up now, which maybe we can talk about later on, is Georgia's. There is a Tbilisi art fair coming up in May, which is also quite an interesting, kind of initiative, indication. Anyway, so hopefully we'll cover as much of this as possible. So to introduce the wonderful panelists now. On my immediate right, we've got Igor Tsukanov, who's the chairman of Tsukanov Family Foundation, is one of the world's leading collectors of post-war Russian art. The collection has been built since 2000 with works ranging from Malevich, Larionov, Natalia Goncharova, Eric Bulatov, Kamar and Milamid, to name a few. In partnership with Sotheby Gallery, the foundation held numerous shows, including Breaking the Ice, Moscow Art 1960 to 80s in 2013, which attracted almost 700,000 visitors. Post-Pop East Meets West in 2015, bringing together 250 artworks of 100 artists from US, UK, China, and Russia. And the latest exhibition in December 2017, which just closed in January, right? It was until mid-January or something, called Art Riot Post-Soviet Actionism, which featured artists Oleg Kulik, Pussy Riot, and Pyotr Pavliensky. The foundation also supports Yale School of Art in the UK, in the US, Goldsmiths in the UK, ICA in Russia. So quite a strong kind of educational element to it. And Igor himself is also on the board of trustees for Moscow Multimedia Art Museum and previously served as member of Russian and Eastern Europe Art Committee at the Tate Modern and board of directors of Hermitage Foundation in the US. That's a very kind of shortened CV, not CV, but bio that I found. Then we've got Jo, the lovely Jo Vickery, Senior and International Director of Russian Art at Sotheby's, where she's been since '97. She served as head of the Russian department from 2004 till 13, where she was a pioneering force driving the market through a decade of growth and development. Alongside achievements of sales such as the Rostropovich-Vishnevskaya collection of Russian art in 2007, she initiated several new sales for Sotheby's, including the very first Russian art sale in London in 2007, and the At the Crossroads Contemporary Art from the Caucasus and Central Asia selling exhibitions in 2012 and 13. In fact, this show was very much the first show, I think, that put Azeri artists on the kind of commercial map. And Jo is a member of the Tate's Russian and Eastern European Acquisition Committee and is the executive editor of Frozen Dreams Contemporary Art from Russia, published by Thames and Hudson in 2012. And then further down we've got Sebastien Montabonel, who's the chair of trustees of the Foundation Art Institutions of the 21st Century, which I hope you'll tell us kind of all about as we go along. He's also the co-founder, partner of Montabonel and Partners and ARMP, a strategy agency working with governments, public and private institutions, and large collections. With offices in London, Berlin, and Beijing. In 2011, Sebastien advised Tate Modern in the acquisition of the Jacobson Hashimoto collection. In partnership with Sotheby Gallery, he started Private Collector Project, organizing the first public display of the Frank Seuss collection in 2010, and the exhibition of the Juan Yarro Contemporary Art Collection in 2010. And his recent projects, amongst many others, include Media in the Expanded Field in 2015 and Going Public, International Art Collectors in Sheffield, also 2015. Okay, so that's out of the way. Finally. Now, over to you. So I think we begin, I don't know what's the best way to kind of go about it. If you want to each kind of say your thoughts about the idea of I guess the challenges, your ideas about generally building on as we kind of, said, on a thriving art market within an emerging economy, whether it's, again, the Caucasus, Russia, pick whichever kind of part, whichever, area, world you're most familiar with experience-wise, and just from what you're, have been experiencing yourself, what's your take on it? Who would like to start? Igor, do you want to?
All right, okay. Ladies first, apparently. Is that working, or yeah? So yeah, just thank you for the bio. So I've got quite a big Russian hat on. I started in the Russian department at Sotheby's in 1997, so I sort of tumbled into an emerging market. I studied Russian at university and was always fascinated by Russian culture and history, and initially literature before art, and then sort of fell into that when it was really quite a small market. I think that the turnover in 1997 was something like £1.3 million. And yes, I absolutely had no idea what I'd sort of stumbled into, because within, I think, about 10 years, when the market peaked in 2007, I think the global turnover for Russian art was nearly sort of $100 million. So it was extraordinary growth. But I think that that's not really so relevant for this evening, because I think that what might be of most interest to everyone here and to the present and the future is really talking more about contemporary art and how we can support the market and grow the market in countries where there perhaps isn't so much infrastructure. So to talk about my sort of experiences that might be more relevant to tonight. As Mila mentioned, we were quite interested in developing sales, in focusing on contemporary art from the Caucasus and Central Asia. It was a field which we didn't really know much about, but there were beginning to be collectors emerging from those areas. So we took an interest in the art and discovered that there was, a lot of great stuff, as I would say. And so we did the first selling exhibition here in London. We decided not to do an auction because if you, I suppose, put, in a kind of vacuum, if you bring new artists to the international market here in London for the first time, and it's an untried and untested sort of market, you could fall on your face very easily and actually, I suppose, damage any green shoots that there are in the local marketplace by getting pricing wrong or perhaps just misreading it. And of course, if it's a vacuum and you don't know what prices people here in, say, in London would pay, it's quite a risky initiative. So we decided to play it cautiously, and we did a selling exhibition, which enabled us to promote new art and to see, how audiences here would engage with the art, whether those audiences would be coming from the region or whether they would be, say, coming through to Sotheby's to the topic from, say, America or whatever. We have obviously a big global brand and a global marketing campaigns for all of our sales. So that was really our first taste of this contemporary art from an emerging market, and the first selling exhibition was very successful. We were very happy with the results. We followed it up the next year because we were very keen to try to build the market, and sadly the next year the results were, I think less than half. So it was tough, and sadly we were not able to carry on with the initiative. What we decided to do at that point is then feed some of the artists that had been more successful into the Russian sale context. So we were able to keep supporting them, but sadly it wasn't really we weren't able to sort of brand it, I suppose, as art from the Caucasus and Central Asia. We then moved on to looking at art from Eastern Europe, which was something that I particularly became interested in after joining the Tate Committee for Russian and Eastern European Art. It was a big eye-opener for me because my background was in Russian art, and suddenly I was sort of looking at pieces by Polish, Czech, Hungarian artists from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I was just absolutely fascinated, and it was a complete eye-opener. There were names that I'd never heard of, which I started to do research on, and actually found out that they were incredibly important in their own countries, and yet there was just so little. You couldn't really see their work here. So we decided to do an auction with contemporary Russian art, and focused also on broadening the brief to include Eastern European artists, with sort of a modicum of success. The Czech art did very well, the Hungarian art did very well, but it was incredibly challenging. And I think we'll get on to talking about, I think, the pricing is one of the things that you wanted to discuss this evening. Pricing was very complicated because what I found when I started to look at offering for sale works by contemporary artists from, say, Poland or the Czech Republic, is that in their home countries there was already a relatively established auction market. There were galleries there that was selling well to local collectors, but we couldn't match those prices here in London, which was incredibly frustrating. It was partly a catch-22 scenario where they hadn't been offered on the international market. So experts and specialists weren't ready to sort of put prices that perhaps you could achieve in Prague for a Czech work. So it was very, very frustrating, but fascinating to work on, and presented many challenges, which perhaps we'll talk about as we move on this evening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just making notes. Sorry, I'm not actually writing rude kind of text in the middle of the panel. No, because something that you touched on just now is that collector base, or the fact that the second year wasn't as successful as the first in terms of the selling exhibition. The collector base of it, I wonder, was that mainly from the region, or was it an international, all sorts, kind of from all walks of life and regions?
Yeah, I would say that there were more collectors from the region that we'd engaged with, because we visited, we went to Baku, we travelled around the region, the different ex-Soviet republics that we represented in the project, and we engaged with collectors on the ground, which I think is really, really important. And so, yes, they participated in the they bought pieces in the selling exhibition, but we did also have interest from international collectors as well, which was very heartening.
Well, and this is something that again kind of touches on what we started to talk about upstairs, is that idea of kind of private and public engagement with private, I'm just thinking private kind of collectors. What would be their initiative? What would be their advantage of supporting or buying essentially works abroad when they have quite a significant kind of collection at home, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of idea of supporting outside home, outside your kind of home country.
Yeah, I guess it's a recognition of, it's engaging with the global art market, and it's about supporting their national artists, in the context of a global sale based in, say, London. And I think that was very important to them, and that was a sort of added motivation. And I think that needs to be applauded, because I do think that, it goes without saying that the auctions, and obviously I'm from the auction world, so I talk about that, but the contemporary sales are very dominated by American and German, Western German artists, British artists, and it's very hard to squeeze in artists from other parts of the world. It's very frustrating. I mean, one example I can think of which was a success was a work by Komer and Melamid, the Russian duo that we sold at Sotheby's in an international contemporary sale, which was fantastic. But it was one example of when we managed to get them into that context. The red flag. You were right, yeah.
Well, there you go. So that's a perfect way for you to take over now. You need to tell us all about it, Igor. How because you started collecting outside Russia or in Russia already.
Well, actually, Jo raised the issue of the fragmentation of the contemporary art world. Hello?
We'll try this one. It's also not really projecting, but
I don't think. Yeah, I think it's just being recorded, but sadly, yeah.
It's okay. There are so many issues to address, to be honest. I don't know which one I should start with. But I'll give you an example from my experience. So a few years ago, actually, I attended at the probably second art fair in Cuba, in Havana. It was maybe actually 5 years ago. It's one of the first one. Actually, I think it was the second one. I was completely shocked to see all major art collectors who actually deals with Latin American art. All of them were there in Havana. So actually, they considered the contemporary Cuban art as a part of the Latin American market. They don't see that Cuba or Mexico, they deal with Latin American art. It was quite an experience, actually. I remember one story when I was from like small delegation from Russia. Anyway, I was given a catalog of this art exhibition. In the first meeting, there was not so many books actually published in Havana by the time. So I probably was one of the only one who actually carried this catalog with me in the VIP reception just before the opening up. And once I put this catalog on table like this, and I saw everyone in the room actually approached them and start looking. They said, "What is this?" I said, "How to get it?" I said, "Yeah, I was presented. It was not for sale. It was like for a few people," which is for me it was indication such a strong interest from the very advanced. Multi-million art collectors who actually came to Havana to bought the Cuban art as a part of the region, of the part of the regional art. They don't focus on one. So, and I'm giving this example only to show that in the current world, currently it's such a difficult to promote like a Czech art, or Polish art, or Hungary, or even from Azerbaijan art. It's such difficult stuff to present in London, in New York, in Paris, wherever, like a small an art from the one country, which is not in a map of the big collectors. It's just difficult stuff. I think in this way, John mentioned that, for example, the Tate Modern, they took an approach to see like Russia and Eastern Europe, and including, I'm sure, the former Soviet Union country as well, as one region, because it's from the institutional perspective, it's much easier to structure this way to see, okay, here's Africa, here's Latin America, here's West Europe, here's of course America, North America, and then the rest. So, and who is in the rest? So, if we put all countries, which is a part of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, which is emerged after the Cold War, as a rest, then they have to present art together rather than country by country. So that's exactly what, for example, now I'm very much involved in this work on the Pompidou Museum. And we are just discussing to establish a committee a new committee on the emerging market. So I'm actually promoting, from my perspective, to establish a committee which deal as a Tate with the region rather than with the country. Because what we do with Ukraine, for example, or with the Belarus, how we cannot set up various committees. We have only one. So. And from collector perspective is the same. If I'm collector of the art, not Russian art actually. I'm collector of the art that was produced in the Soviet Union. So actually, my collection actually is focused primarily on the post-war Soviet Union art, which will actually end up, which the final, not the final, but the end of this period it's the beginning of 90s. So I'm buying other art, contemporary, but not as a part of the collection, but as a part of the new collection, which is separate from the Soviet Union. And in my view, I think this clearer message which we can deliver, we as collectors, to deliver to the institutional world, to the museums, and to some extent to the auction house as well. So it's not about a particular country. It's about, I would say, the cultural period, which can produce different art, but it's just. It should be like unified within the period and within the region, but not within one country. I think it's very, very clear. And once that base is established and accepted by institutions, then new artists, which will kind of who emerged after this period, they can deal easily with the collector worlds, because they are part of the history which was defined as a history, as a specific cultural world. So in short, I think I can continue forever, but in short, what I'm saying is that I think I would really encourage the galleries and collectors and art promoters like myself. For example, I do collecting. I do collecting. I've been doing collecting for years, but last maybe 6-7 years, I moved a little bit in art production. So I do exhibitions, and as you correctly said, with the Saatchi gallery, which is private gallery. It's not actually gallery. It's like art space. Actually, it's not exactly the gallery. And I couldn't establish such a partnership with the public institutions in London for various reasons, including the most important one, that we cannot act fast enough to produce shows every second year. It's difficult. So I produced 4 shows, and in the next one, by the way, will be in October 2019. It will be show on the Caucasus.
Next year.
Yeah, next year. Caucasus. It will will cover. It will cover the Caucasus as not as a country by country, which is again will be Armenia, Azerbaijan, and of course in Georgia. Another part will be Dagestan from the other part of the Caucasus stuff. But it will be exhibition which will show the art from contemporary art from Caucasus from the perspective of the female artists.
Okay.
Female artists. So this is what the idea is. So this is next step. That's what I'm saying. I'm not focusing on Russian art only, but I really want to bring to London the perspective that cover the big region, the big picture, but not country by country. I say it's impossible. Yeah. It's impossible to use a Georgian art or Azerbaijan art in London. But together, it's much stronger message. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Do you feel generally in terms of collectors, or over the years since you started collecting, do you feel like you've kind of inspired other, I guess, Russian collectors to start collecting on that level with that kind of passion? How far do you think it trickles down or across the kind of local collector base? Because the issue, not the issue, but I guess one of the questions that keeps on recurring in my mind, and that's something, Sebastien, maybe you can kind of come into the discussion as well, is this idea of, again, the private support of an art market locally and internationally. In your case, as I understand, it's more you operate on an international level, so you don't really you wouldn't necessarily host exhibitions or try to show works either from the collection or not in Russia. It's mainly operating here in London or wherever in the US or in other parts of Europe, right? So you're kind of working on that international stage more. Yeah. I wonder, is there a way to kind of does it help in a way with your initiatives as well to have a thriving market, let's say, or a booming kind of which to a certain degree Russia does have that kind of, we were saying just now, how many museums are there now in across the board, right? There's quite a few, and they're continuing to open, but whether it's privately or publicly funded, etc., that's a whole other kind of discussion, I guess. But in terms of that idea of the local support for these collectors, because it's these emerging kind of collector base as well from these emerging countries, how do we engage with them from here, sitting here and putting on shows here, but also allowing that to kind of spread out? Maybe Sebastien, you can have a.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm gonna try to help how a market works and what's the strategy of an institution. Basically, there's still a hierarchy in the way things works. And the top of the tree, you still have the museum, the big museum, the big brand, Tate, MoMA, Pompidou, whatever. They still more or less decide what is hot and not hot. The reality is things have changed before that was entirely publicly funded. So the money was coming directly from the states. So that used to give them a huge, being very, very independent. The problem that you have, it's like in the last 10, 15 years, public funded became really, really expensive. So they have to find different way of fundraising. So if we take Tate, because we talk about Tate, it's really interesting because they found a strategy to fundraise. So they decided to do by region, not by medium, not by movement, but by region. They thought, and they was right, the best way to fundraise is to say, oh, let's do Eastern board, let's do a Middle Eastern board. The only medium they decided to do was photography because they thought, okay, there is a pocket there where we can take. The reality is when they collect, they don't really collect by region, but they still collect the old way by a movement. But saying so because these people are very powerful, they still can influence the shows. But the shows in institutions are not paid by the public purse, but they are paid by the gallery. And that's really important. So before 2010, the galleries, so what we're going to call technically the market, was supporting emerging and mid-weight or mid-career artists. So that's the type of show you used to see a lot. The problem is the market became really sophisticated, and the financial markets start to do securitization on artwork, aging the artwork. So you start to have a lot of financial products. So the big galleries, because now the collector, that's what they want. They want to be able to leverage their art without selling the artwork. So the galleries, when they saw that trend coming, instead of supporting the mid-career artist, they decided to support people with a very strong secondary market, people very established, because that's the financial institutions, that's what they are supporting, like the banks. So suddenly you had a major shift in what's becoming hot or not. So when you read in the press, they said that, oh, it's the expensive rent that is killing the mid-market. In reality, it's not this. It's the financial product that are offered out there that is killing the mid-career or the mid-weight artists. So that's why it's very difficult to get in, because when an institution makes a show, they monopolize what the collector is going to read, you know, because they monopolize the press, the PR, everything, and they're really strong on social media. So they're touching the entire community very quickly, and it's very difficult to have a voice as a, you know, now as a mid-career artist and things like this. So you had a professionalization that have changed very quickly. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but and this has a huge impact. The good news is is that you have a lot of you know, private collector, like philanthropists, that can open their own space. And this is really important because they don't have the same restraint, financial restraint that public institutions have. So when you look at the big private, what I call privately funded but publicly minded, when they open their show, they don't really go with the blockbuster of a Picasso. You know, if you look at the Prada Foundation, they took mid-career artists, and they're still promoting mid-career artists. So I think at the moment seems very unbalanced, but because we see more and more of this private platform coming in, hopefully that's going to balance out, because otherwise we might be in trouble, not as a gallery, but just the ecosystem will die. So I think it's really important, and I think private collectors still have a big things to do, a big play, and you can see it more and more. But I'm not sure how much of that power they know that they have. But it's going to take a bit of time. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just wondered if I could pick up on something about the mid-career artists. I think that from my experiences with particularly Eastern Europe, there are artists there who are not mid-career. They're already dead. They're very well established art historically. I mean, for example, Knifer, you know, the Croatian painter, who is really, you know, one of Croatia's greatest post-war artists. If you look at his record, say at auction, which is, you know, the most obvious way of testing the market of an artist, because it's public information. you will find that the top price for Kniffer today for a work which is in 1960s, the Gorgona period, basically for a collector, that's what you want. You only have to pay in the region of $150,000. Now, I say only, to somebody that's a lot of money, but if you look at somebody like the American-Canadian artist Agnes Martin, whose market is growing very fast at the moment, her top price, I think, at the moment is around $10 million. And she's a total contemporary of Kniffer. And, why is there such a discrepancy? So we don't have a problem just with mid-career. We have a problem also in the regions of artists who, should be well established, and you just, don't see their works.
Isn't that exactly what Sebastien was just saying? That basically the museums are setting the prices in a kind of way. Because Agnes Martin, for example, there was a big show recently, and behind exactly, what he was saying. And yesterday there was an article in the Times about that soon you'll see a £1 billion sale because the museums are keep on buying art. Like I think they are basically influenced the whole.
I agree, and I think behind the top top artists, Western artists today on the market, you've got a massive infrastructure behind every single artist, and that infrastructure, it differs from artist to artist. You have, it depends which gallery represents them. Have they had a major museum show recently? But you have curators, you have a catalogue raisonné possibly. You have all that supporting one artist. Whereas if you look at Central and Eastern Europe, you have major artists there who just literally now beginning to be bought or sort of looked at by major museums like Tate and MoMA. One example is the Czech artist Bela Kolajova, who we offered for sale 2 years ago for the first time ever on the international market. Out of 12 pieces, 11 sold. It was amazing. We were very happy to see that result. But that's also just because her work had just started to be bought by MoMA. I think they'd acquired literally 6 months before. They'd acquired an important piece from the 1960s for I think around about $60,000. So, she was suddenly, there was a visibility there. And I think that's really important. So, building that infrastructure behind each artist is critical. But, there's a lot of work to do, I think.
Because I think it's really important to understand how it works. In the art world, we love to say, oh, this guy or this collector or whoever, he's got a great eyes. The truth is, eyes doesn't really bring much to the market. At best, the collector have a good ear. So, and that's what is really important. And everything becomes a brand. And the stronger the brand, the stronger the price. And a brand is even an artist now is a brand. So because people don't have an eye, or I'm not saying they are not knowledgeable, but they don't have a huge amount of knowledge. Some are, but most of it don't have. So they tick boxes. They say, oh, this artist is a brand. Tick. Is in a gallery that is a massive brand. Tick. Is in that museum that is... and all this, that's what's going to create the price.
Surely what allowed the brand to develop, the reason why American artists in the 60s are so well known in the West, and yet Eastern Europe is unknown, is because it was all behind the Iron Curtain. Draw comparisons with the boy bands in Poland, throughout Eastern Europe, who, had they been in the UK, would have been as big as the Beatles, but no one has heard of them. So I think it can be just a lag time, and I imagine in time, hopefully, it may not catch up, but the people will start to get to know the brand, get to know the artist.
Yeah, if I may say, I think it's quite contrary to saying, Sebastien. So I don't have any examples actually in the art of the 20th century where museums actually took leadership in terms of bringing artists to the world. So they're also behind the collectors, decades behind. So they didn't buy impressionist artists in the beginning. They didn't buy American arts in the afterwar. They didn't buy anything. So actually, the market and the perception artist is all built by collectors. So the museums follows them all the time. So I'm not sure. Again, I understand exactly what you mean saying that the museums support artists wherever. So if you look at the Tate Modern of the last few years, they have big shows because it's very simple. They have to sell tickets. They have to bring revenue. They don't care about promoting artists, to be honest, at all. It's not their job, completely. However, so if you look at, for example, what's happened in London last few years, one is the Rauschenberg exhibition. The same time the private galleries run exhibition of Rauschenberg. So if there's, it's always in parallel because they leverage actually presentation of from museums and run on shows. So that's how it works actually, in my view. It's not work other way around, that museums have a view to present artists to the world. It's no way around. The museums, they're absolutely keen to sell tickets. That's it.
But
it's my view as a collector point of view.
Absolutely.
So I don't know any examples of the emerging markets artists as well who actually benefit hugely from the particular presentation in the museums. I have zero.
Sure.
In a sense.
But that's what I'm saying. It's a show in a particular museum will have an impact on the market. I'm not saying what they are introducing is revolutionary.
Theoretically, only theoretically. In principle, yes, but reality is it's not. Yeah. It's not, because if you follow prices, if you think, I have no simple examples when prices jumped after the one show. It's not work this way. It's not work this way. Really, I'm not sure about it.
With Russian artists, we had the case when some of them were getting into Tate, like for example, beginning of noughties in 2000, and some of them even had their faces on the covers of the magazine. And you would think, okay, now it would really start off for them. They really got into stardom and people would start buying their works, but then nothing happened. So it actually proves, I think, Jo's points that if there is no infrastructure, and even if there is infrastructure, but it's not working internationally, nothing will happen. They will just have the 15 minutes of, I don't know, glory, and then it will all subside and they will be forgotten, they will fall into oblivion. And they will have to start working practically back from scratch, trying to restore the connections because, again, there is nobody backing them.
I think Iran, you're right, but there are also, we have to make a distinction between, or some difference between collectors and purchasers of art. There are two different animals, actually. So, in my recent visit in California with the Pompidou patrons in August, so in September last year. So we visited probably 15 most important California-based collectors. It was huge exercises. So I see the same name. Every collector has the same name. So actually, they put art on the walls not because, as a collector, from collector perspective, but because it's a part of the status, if you want. So it's the same names. If the artist is not gained the status within the California crowd, it's out. So there is no single European artist, by the way, I have seen in the California collectors. It's the major ones actually. No single European artist was there. None. Zero. So
but that's also the idea of branding, which is what Sebastien was saying.
It's branding,
which is
but
what
it's
Sebastien was saying.
Yeah.
With both the museums that go into it, the collectors, the names of the certain
yeah, but
collectors.
This is the point. So if you, they're not collectors. So there's different things. It's very important. In my view, I'm a collector because very focused on what, how, and it is different. So actually, I restricted myself from purchasing certain art, which is a very nice one, but it's not part of the collection because it doesn't fit from one way to another. Because it's in terms of the interest of the museums, etc. But the vast majority of people who are buying art, they're not collectors. They just buying art because it's the same way how they buy nice cars and prestige houses, etc. There's different things. So as soon as the artist is a part of the branding, it is a correct one. So then they have all kind of people who buy because it's a way like a nice car. That's it.
Which probably doesn't really have much of a longevity then, once an artist goes into...
It depends on the quality of the structure. What I mean is, if behind you have a strong artist estate, a strong gallery, a strong support from the local economy, I mean, in Europe, there's a country that does extremely well. It's Germany. Okay, they're in the top 20, and when I said top 20, I'm talking in terms of money this time. After, we can always debate if they are the best artists in the world or not. That's another debate. But they've been extremely good. And, in the Düsseldorf Cologne, the ecosystem is very, very healthy. And I've been working with different emerging country governments, and we always look at this ecosystem and see how we can replicate this. And it's mean they have strong education systems. They have a strong collector base, but not only they are strong collector base, but they are pro-national this, and their galleries are extremely strong, and they know how to export the market. They know how to deal with pricing. They know how to deal with secondary markets. I mean, they have true skills. And Germany probably in Europe are the one who do it the best out of everyone. Better than France, better than Spain, better than Italy. I think they are, they are on top of their game at the moment. But I forgot what was my point. But what I'm saying is, longevity depends on the quality of the structure. When the thing is a bit shaky, it's very easy. We have did say it's very easy to fool once 1,000 people. But it's very difficult to fool 1,000 times the same person. So it all depends on your structure. And a structure, it's not one entity, it's the entire ecosystem.
It's that ecosystem. Yeah. So I guess the question is, in places or in countries, regions where there is a lack of institutional presence, collector base, a strong collector base, but a thriving artistic, creative scene, where do you start off? Where do you start from? And I guess that's kind of a question to all of you, is it something where the government kicks in and starts supporting certain kind of initiatives and opens up a few more museums, but then how do you ensure that engagement with the museums, with the exhibitions on a local level, on a kind of turnout level, actually results in a healthy collector base, in a healthy art market as such? So is it something that you build on locally and then, as you said, export? Or is it something that you try and kind of really barge into the existing market, which is out here in the West and elsewhere where there is a prominent market? What do you think?
It's a very difficult question. I think whether the state should support contemporary art in a way. I grew up in a country, the UK, where we've had the Arts Council for many decades now, and that's shaped who I am and how I see art. And I suppose I therefore have a value. I believe that on some level we should have sponsorship by the state for our art institutions. We talked briefly about this upstairs, and I know you had a different view, that it's should be more individually driven. And I was interested to hear that, because it was quite different to what I felt. And I thought, hey, sometimes you start to question what you think when someone comes along with a different view, and you think, well, I must expand my worldview on this. But I suppose I just do fundamentally, and it's a fundamental belief. I do believe that the state should support our cultural institutions, including contemporary art, in some way. I think that's important.
If I may add, I'm sure art is to some extent is a part of general philanthropy in a good way. And I think it's a function of the size of the economy as well. So if you look at the emerging countries, the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in total, all together, I guess the size of this economy will be still like 5% of the size of the Western economies, including U.S. and Western Europe. So why should art collectors spend more than 5%, as opposed to the American collectors because the size of the economy is 5% out there. So it always depends on the staff really. So in the US, general philanthropy, in energy philanthropy, they probably spend probably $500 billion a year to support philanthropic projects. In the UK, it's much smaller because of tradition. The UK is not so keen to do that, right? But it's not exactly the size. But what I'm saying is that if the economy, if this particular economy in particular is doing just fine, then more collectors come. I do remember in Russia in 2007, which was probably the most successful year, yeah, so in terms of the in the Sotheby's, etc. So the economy was very strong actually. There's so many people actually, they just start spending money for good things, for this. But then what happened? So just vice versa. So and the prices I paid, for example, in 2007 for the artwork from the Sotheby's, I couldn't get this price if I want to sell, but I don't because I'm not a collector. I'm not selling, but I will never get this price, right? So as opposed to like 10 years later.
Yeah.
It's only reason why because now it's completely different country, and in the same as Azerbaijan, I'm sure the same in other countries. So that's what I'm saying. So it's not about a healthy collectors base. The healthy collectors base will come after the healthy economy. If the healthy economy is not healthy, how we can establish healthy collectors?
Yeah, but I guess the question is with the healthy economy is if collectors are necessarily kind of, or if it will have a direct impact on a collector base for arts, or it would be just expenditure people just spend on fashion items and on houses and on tech and whatever, but not necessarily art. And the point in cases Silicon Valley, for example, of people still trying to, or galleries, dealers still trying to crack the market of the new kind of, the tech billionaires out there who haven't exactly fallen in line with this typical collector mentality yet, or probably never will. Maybe they will.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Unique pieces, which is the top of the top. Yeah, they will always find their buyers, regardless of the state of the economy, because they're unique. So they also come to collectors who don't care about how to match. But it's a 3%, 4% of the art market. So the rest of the market it's a medium size, it's small, medium size, it's galleries, etc., etc. So in this case, the people who actually tend to buy this stuff, not at the top of the top, they represent the vast majority of the art buyers.
Yes.
So if they're not keen to do that for economic reasons and because their mind are not there, so that's exactly why the markets go down.
Yeah.
It's very simple. So it's
I guess
what's happened in emerging markets now.
Buying on that kind of mid-level emerging price range-wise, so we're not talking about the blue chip, the artists who take all the branding boxes we were talking about before. Younger mid-career artists from the regions that we're talking about, the younger regions, the younger economies, albeit thriving economies. But would that necessarily breed or develop a collector base on a local level that would be quite open and interested in spending a certain amount, even though it's not on the 6-7 figure level, just because the economy is doing well of the country? And again, the point in case is the Emirates, right? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, what's happening kind of there, which has again a thriving obviously economy, and with the art fair, art fairs in the region, there seems to be quite a lot of transactions happening. But the question is it the local collectors that are buying, or it's those that are visiting collectors from, again, the more established economies that are just kind of purchasing these works out there to support the fair or the galleries that are exhibiting? Or
I mean, I can talk about Abu Dhabi. I was the advisor for the royal family for the whole project. So. So at the beginning, this project was really interesting, but it didn't start from a cultural point of view, but from the tourist office. So they were seeing a bit as a Disneyland. So that's how it started. They say, okay, we're going to buy a few brands, So Le Louvre, education was really important, so that's why they picked Le Louvre rather than another one. They've done a deal with La Sorbonne, the Guggenheim and everything. And they saw it as a purely investment purpose to put Abu Dhabi on the map, their biggest competitor, not financially, because the resources are huge compared, but it's Dubai. So, and that was run by the Ministry of Tourism. And then after, when we start talking, we say, okay, of course, it's great for tourism, it's great for visibility, it's great for the brand of Abu Dhabi, but how do you develop your local culture? How do you make sure that at the end your culture doesn't become European or American or Russian or whatever? And this is much more challenging. So that's why education took time. The thing is, different regions will react differently to the way of collecting regarding of their relationship with money. And it's really important. The problem is a lot of people want to make an investment. You know, at the time, in the 80s, galleries will say, you should buy this work, this is incredible because blah, blah, blah. In 2000, you had a lot of shortcut. People say you should buy it now because if to close the sale, they say if you don't buy it now, tomorrow it will be worth twice the money. So this whole new generation of collector coming, they're here to make money. Nobody want to lose. At best, they don't want to lose. They want to, I buy it 10 and I want to sell it 10 when I need to. But now this idea of not losing but also earning, it's very, very important. And when I was talking about financial product, just compared to before, if you buy this work, the only way to generate liquidity out of it was to sell it. Now you can generate liquidity without selling the artwork. So that changed the entire way people gonna start collecting. And because even if you're very wealthy, nobody like to spend money and not see it back. You know, people get divorced, people get into debts or whatever. So at the end, money, I mean, we're talking for it's not everybody that collect. Even the very wealthy, nobody threw away money via the windows. Some people, they do it for a very different way, and I guess that's what about you. It's about their legacy. So they approach the way of collecting in a very, very different way, in the way they're gonna architect their collection, they're gonna structure it. But most of the people, they see it as an investment, and that's a shame. But that's the way where we are going, and this will change, and it has already changed the landscape of collectors. So we need more collectors that really believe in the power of the arts. But
can I just say something? Yeah. I don't think you're quite right, because if you read the Art and Finance Deloitte report from 2017, they did a study on who buys art and what. The emotional sector of buying art is still very high up. After this is the social prestige, and after that it's the portfolio diversity. So I do think you're right, as in they want to diverse the portfolio, and you can lend money on your art, or people lend money on your art. But even that is very conservative. People are only lending between 30 to 50%, and they keep the piece of art in their possession. So, you know, but I think emotionally people still buy. It's like falling in love. I think we should have more illusions, and we should believe in what this wonderful collector is saying, that there is an emotional.
The emotional part, it's key. But when you go above 1 million, they like to buy something that they really like, that they connect, but also somehow something is kicking in.
This is what Jussi Kokanen said. He said, buy art from Willem de Kooning, buy art from Francis Bacon, buy art from Warhol. There's no way
it's more secure. It's more secure to buy art over 1 million. It's much more secure than to buy art under 100,000. It's much more secure. It's actually it's good. It's not about money. It's security as well. That's clear.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I like to feel at Sotheby's we do sell art because there's an element of passion, and I do believe that actually there is obviously the financial transaction, and nobody wants to ever lose anything, lose any money over something, and I absolutely think that's a responsibility that we all have, irrespective of what wealth we have. But there is a huge amount of passion driving it, and yes, perhaps on the there's an element in the market of trends and fashions and people buying something because other people have it. That's always going to be there. We're a tribe, we're tribal, and we often do that. So, that's an element that will always be there. I want to go back to something that Igor said earlier on about Latin American art. And it ties in a little bit with the comment that the gentleman made here about the Iron Curtain and sort of Central and Eastern European contemporary art. It's true to say that I think that the Latin American contemporary art market is very highly developed and has been for many decades, and it works very well together. You have several countries, their works in one catalogue or exhibition. It works very well together as a region, if I could use that word. Whereas we haven't got to that with really, I think, at all when you look at Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Russia, the Caucasus, all parts of the world that were part of the ex-Soviet Union. And I think that's a shame. And I think there are great sensitivities still there historically, which are difficult to overcome. And that's something that I came up against when I worked on the project that I did a couple of years ago. And those are very hard to get over. I feel very neutral because I'm Scottish. I've come to all of this without a sort of personal history and baggage, and that makes it very easy in a way. But actually then you start to see the sensitivities that other people who've come from the region have grown up there. They have their own personal histories and sense of culture. And, it's not easy. But that said, the truth is that throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s, there was, the Soviet Union was an empire, and there was a lot in common there. And, you can't deny that it's there, but the question is sort of how to build that in the future, and that's quite complicated. And I do take that gentleman's point about the Iron Curtain. That said, it came down in 1989, I believe, which was nearly 30 years ago now, which seems like a long time. I feel very old. I was in Germany at the time I was studying German. And I can't believe I was alive at that point. It makes me feel very old. But I was there. And, but it was a long time ago. And I just think, where are we now? I don't feel we've got very far. And I would like to see a sort of Latin American style marketplace for art from we're talking about how many countries? We're talking about dozens of countries with such deep cultures. I always feel that, if you look back at the Russian avant-garde, the roots start there. When you look at a lot of Eastern European art from the 60s and 70s, it goes back there. And then it actually emigrated to America. A lot of American art goes back to the same roots as well. We don't celebrate that enough. We don't recognize those, those roots that art has in common. And, the divisions are still there, and it's quite complicated, I have to say. Anyway.
What do you think about such initiatives as Art East Foundation, when they were trying to start collecting the art of the region, not just Polish art, although with their progress, but they're talking about Eastern European art?
I just think that is so admirable. I love it, and that's how things should be. Because they have such a lot culturally in common, and I think there needs to be a kind of new internationalism. And I sort of felt when we did this project of Contemporary East several years ago now, I remember looking at the catalogue thinking this is a sort of international sale, because how many nationalities did we have there? Yet it sort of felt that it was just sort of somehow on the periphery, so much on the periphery, and just felt it almost didn't exist. And that's the predicament that I think a lot of Central and Eastern European and artists have today, sadly, and even those that have long since passed away and who are so well established and have proved themselves and are incredibly important historically, and they're sort of not really visible, and that's a huge challenge that we have.
I think I'm not an expert in Eastern art. So it's just going to be about what I think. So it's a perception. It might be not true. But what I'm saying is there's no doubt that Eastern art is really, 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 really important. You know, modernism, everything. You know, it's super, super important. They have extremely powerful collectors. I think they have, you know, a lot of things. But there's one thing that I think where they are not as strong. It's a very strong network of powerful galleries. And without a very strong, powerful network of galleries, it's almost impossible for a market to strive. That's my understanding. And Latin America have some very, especially in Brazil, and they have very strong and powerful galleries.
It's something we're hoping to kind of change, but it's kind of like the chicken or the egg situation, because how would the galleries thrive if there is a lack of collector base, or at least not as vibrant as another, you know, in kind of, you know, Latin America and elsewhere. Presumably there needs to be a certain kind of push and a certain investment from the galleries, and at least if it's kind of an, you know, a handful of them, before that network kind of starts developing and reinforcing what you're saying, the artists and the ecosystem generally, right?
I think it's really important. It's almost like a mafia, but when I say a mafia, it's in a positive way. You need many actors coming together, strong collectors backing up a gallery heavily, having huge things and backing also artists, and maybe that can come also with government funds. But the strategy needs to be global. The things that I see maybe in Eastern, it's a perception again, it's everybody is doing a bit on their own. There is not so much crossover. When America decided to become a major player in contemporary art, they say, okay, we are the first global economy. We cannot be the last one when it comes to culture. They suddenly put a plan together, and it worked, because before Paris was the capital for, you know, for art. So what I mean is that network need to be much more fluent, and they need to help each other, because nobody on its own can, you know, push a country or a region or whatever. So you need different actors coming together and play the muscles.
Can I ask you something? Yeah. Do you think that political situation between these countries kind of influence the art scene? For example, Russia hasn't established a really good relationship with America and England, and, you know, maybe it kind of like influences, you know, the art scene somehow. For example, if you sell, you know, if you have like an auction, and for example, there is things happening in like Ukraine with Russia, and, you know, the UK is not supporting this particular situation, would it affect you, or what do you think of this matter?
Very good question. I mean, if you look at the Russian art market as a whole, and that's not just Russian contemporary art, but also the sort of early 20th century art, perhaps 19th century, you definitely see a connection between the political and economic sort of wider picture and the results of the sales. That said, sometimes in times of strife, when there are sort of issues and problems, people then flock to art, and you sometimes find that prices go up. So there is a complex relationship between the politics and the economic situation and the art market, of course. That's definitely, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's an issue of political problems. Of course, everyone now has a problem with Russia politically. It's no question about that. But they're probably the only artist, Russian artists, who are now part of international collections. Maybe Ilya Kabakov. It's the only one for various reasons. He immigrated late 80s, and he's been heavily promoted. And he's a great artist, first of all, yeah, number one. But if I return back to what I said previously about the view how people actually support the artists, that that's again, so in returning back to my California trip, so the only German artists there, I say in the museums, in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it's in big museums, like Kiefer Richter was there. So in terms of the biggest collectors in California, there was no single German artist in the collectors. There's a 95% American artist. It's because the political issues between America and Germany? I don't think so. It's people actually buy what actually they were told, what they say around. So it's not. I don't think the political issues are, in any sense, is a driven force for buying artists or not buying artists. It's not. However, of course, the perception how the local galleries promote own artists, it's an issue. So, if, for example, I know lots of American galleries in London and in Russia as well. So in Russia, 90% the artists they promote is Russian artists because they live there, they deal with them. So in America, 90% is American artists. Not American. There's people who live there and work with the galleries, etc. So and only a handful of top galleries actually who actually do international stuff. Maybe 15 galleries. Actually, they work across the globe. They do different artists. So the rest galleries, they work with the local artists. That's why they work. They sell to people where they live.
Well,
that's it.
I think that's really important in a world of globalization. Now, today, before it was different, but it's really important to have a very powerful gallery with artists from one region. So your artists need to have a global language, which is the global language of art, and they need to be matched. So when you go to whatever, the one across the road, David Zwirner, they don't really care if they come from Germany, if they come from America, or if they come from China. But what they are saying, they put them on the same level, and that's how they push the price. So when an artist estate go from a gallery that is not really strong in the global network to there, the price, they can triple up, quadruple up. So it's very difficult and maybe impossible, I don't know, I don't have the answer, to create a global stage for artists without having a global network of artists inside your gallery. And to be global, you need to have this global language. There is a common aesthetic. That's the problem with globalization. It's not only true for the arts, it's true for everything.
Yes, exactly, but so only 15, maybe 20 top galleries deal with stuff. Because the way of globalization is concentration as well. So these top galleries, they dominate in a sense. They bring artists like Ropach, for example. They do it all kinds of, but there is only few of them. Yeah. But it's still percentage-wise. It looks global, but it's still small. It's still small because the rest of the world is hundreds of thousands of galleries in the country. They deal with the local artists.
But also, I think with in terms of security, galleries, even the top kind of 5 galleries, would be very careful at bringing artists from emerging regions, emerging areas as well, because there's not maybe enough of that collector support, or they would have to push, like you said something a bit earlier, is it will be super difficult to push, artists from specifically Azerbaijan or Georgia. It's best to do it on a regional scale, from a collector's point of view, probably from a gallery's point of view as well. But if you're talking about Ropach, Werner, etc., who are, I very much doubt they would pick up on an artist from Georgia, from wherever, in kind of places where it still is an emerging kind of art market, an emerging art scene. To try it out, or to kind of, without having a solid guarantee almost of it succeeding. Do you think, or I don't know? What do you reckon?
I think it's what's the name of the young kids that they took at Zwirner? That everybody wanted it. Is Latino.
Oscar Murillo.
Oscar Murillo.
Yeah.
What I mean is, they took Oscar Murillo. They could have done it with anyone. I think
But Oscar Murillo wasn't. He was what, an RCA graduate, I think. He had very much of a.
What is important is your ability as a gallery to control the career, to control the secondary market, to control the primary market, to control the price. So it's very difficult to do this with a midway or mid-career artist that didn't really plan everything. But when you take a young kid, you can take it from anywhere as long as you have full control. To take him from nobody to there, you need full control. You need to control everything, the secondary market, the primary market, the collection, the museum you're gonna do, everything needs to be watertight. Otherwise, it's flooded. So, and I think that's really important, and it doesn't really matter where it's from. So this is really important, how you build the hype, how you're gonna manage the PR, things like this. I'm very close to some artists that move from a very good mid-weight galleries to a big one, like to Hauser. And the strategy that is behind, I mean, it's army strategy. There's no randomness. And they control everything. And they are extremely strict. They look like, oh, we are hippies. It's not.
No, but like you said, it's very much kind of part of an essential part of the ecosystem on a whole kind of international, global level. Galleries, you cannot, even if I think nowadays kind of the idea of a traditional gallery model is changing, and there's a lot more artist agencies or artists themselves thinking that they could do it on their own, which some of them can, flourish without the gallery support. There's still not nothing structure-wise, nothing comes close to a proper traditionally run gallery.
So here, you talk a lot about globalization, and but I'm really wondering, it's like, where does the online market fit in here? Because if you talk about globalization and all these online platforms, and they're rising, and they might not be there yet, where we can talk that they sell blue chip art or they sell expensive art, but they're rising. So I think that's definitely something that's going to increase, that would be interesting to talk about, especially because that really is global. You can be in London, you can bring in people from Eastern Europe.
I think that's an amazing point. And I just think back how our business has been transformed by, the internet. I mean, not so long ago, maybe sort of 15 years ago, I used to go to New York to look for Russian paintings to sell in London, and I would go out there and I would bring back maybe a dozen pieces, which would sell in the London sale often for double or triple what they had sold for on the market there. The internet has changed all of that. I mean, local markets it's part of life. Something might sell well in Moscow that's not going to sell well in Boston or vice versa. I mean, that's part of being human. All markets are different. That's why we travel. We go to different places. We try to use and exploit those systems. But with the internet, you're right. The online sales, it's changing everything because it's truly global, and it's changing how we price things. And is it sort of what effect is that going to have on the market in 10 or 20 years' time? Because I think it's still evolving. I think it's still quite early days, but it is definitely changing how we approach trading art and how we consume art.
Java, the online platform, which is there are quite few already established for the art sales. So normally what happens online, they push price down, not up. Yeah, but in terms of transparency, yes, of course, online platform provides transparency, and there's difficult. It's the same artist could technically should be sold in the same price in London, New York, and whatever in Ukraine through online, but push price down, but not up. I fail to see how online sales will be able to make branding for new artists. I really don't think so. So this branding is done not through trading platform, but through different things. But as soon as branding is there, then artists could sell hundreds of paintings through the online rather than through the auction, but not other way around. So if he's not there, the price will go down, not up. So idea for that is to go up, not down. So this,
But I think there is the price point is really important with the online. You have to remember that most of the collector, regardless of the investment or not, the social element is really important. So someone that spend, of course, like I say, they don't want to lose, but they want to be part of a club. I mean, we're talking luxury product. We're not talking just any kind of goods. So for them, when you invite your best clients to the restaurant, that you introduce him to another collector, so what we're going to call the hardcore network, is key. So what I'm saying, it's online platform can only be successful if they can treat their customer in this, because that's why people goes into this. The ability to meet other people of similar wealth or more wealthy, I mean, it's really bad what I'm going to say, but it's a big driver. The people to be able to believe, oh, I'm in this exclusive club of super collectors is really important. That give you different type of access as a collector. If you take away this and you just say it's all about sell, I think you're missing one of the important driver. And what I've seen so far, I'm not an expert of a digital platform, but up to a certain point, a price point, they are struggling. So, you can sell things up to, and I think that's the same with auction house. If the collector knows the thing up is happy, but he knows that Sotheby is going to treat him well. They're going to do the belly dance, they're going to invite him, they're going to send the customer card, whatever. But any platform, if they want to be successful, they need to give that driver to collectors. That's what I believe, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, the online sales at Sotheby's are growing fast. I mean, I don't have the statistics to hand, but I know that it's the participation in auctions online is higher and higher. That said, at the top end of the market, no. I mean, for example, technology sometimes doesn't work. Imagine if you're bidding on a $50 million Picasso online and your computer goes down, it would be slightly worrying. So it doesn't suit all situations, but I do think it's a growing tool which is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's bringing us all together and sort of perhaps in a way neutralizing a little bit the local markets possibly,
which is quite maybe, but also which is quite a little worrying in a way, because it seems like there's a bigger gap then between the ease of sale and acquisitions online in, again, established kind of markets versus younger economies, which as a gallery we're having not difficulties but challenges to actually bring them physically into the space. So let alone kind of introduce the idea of buying online. We're looking at introducing the idea of buying art full stop. So it's kind of I'm guessing as there is a rapid increase of online sales kind of having an impact, or online platforms having an impact on acquisitions and sales. It in the meantime, it kind of makes it a little more, or maybe not, or maybe it will. If anything, I think in terms of the online side of things, at least from our end, from kind of our experience, is being access to information, which has been quite difficult to find when this show was being put together. Even being from kind of Baku, for example, it's not really access to the information. It's just there's not much written about these artists and I think that's something that's can be kind of broadened out from Azerbaijan and beyond. In a way, it's not necessarily kind of a challenge, a local challenge, but it's that idea of opening up, which will hopefully bring about critics and writers and historical text to back these artists and the creatives that come out from that region. But it's that kind of, I think from that end, it's more relevant for me personally when, again, putting this show together in terms of emerging economies, rather than viewing the online and the globalization element of it as an online, as a kind of a sale platforms.
I think one of the downsides of the internet and information through that is if for example, say there's an artist that you're interested in and you Google the artist to find out more. It might be an artist from Azerbaijan or someone that you've not come across before. You might be quick to judge that artist by what you find online, and their online presence might not be that strong. And so instead of really then taking a further look and being more curious and perhaps looking more at the artwork, you might just think, well, okay, there's not really a presence online, so that artist can't be that important. Which I think, and that's maybe a slightly extreme way of expressing it, but I think we do judge things by what we see online, unfortunately. So there's downsides to, the internet as well, as we all know.
But internet's going to change a lot. There's virtual reality coming. So the way they're going to experience the work, it's going to be very different. At the moment, website is very flat. In 2 or 3 years' time, the experience that we're gonna get outside the online experience is gonna totally change. But I still believe, we do a lot of sell in my business. Above £100,000, you cannot close a sale via email. You need to go to the restaurant. You need to pick up the phone. That's the way the business. They want to meet. You have to remember, very few of them use lawyers. So it's the image that you project, it's very quick. So the human factor to close a sale is still very, very important. I'm not saying it's never going to change. But in 2 days, regardless of all the information that you give and the face-to-face is still key to close a sale.
Igor, would you ever buy online over 100,000?
Online is perfect, so it's a perfect platform. But I get information very, very easily. But actually, Joe mentioned about the getting access online to the Sotheby's sales. It's a different than to buy online from various galleries, etc. It's 2 different things. So, but I guess I enjoy buying online actually from Sotheby's. So I really don't need issue at all. It's not multi-million. It's not multi-million sales, by the way. But if I just mention, maybe just because I think we're going to wrap up also, I think again, it's still, I quite regularly participate in the roundtables talking about artists, etc. But it's always kind of, I got some impressions. So people sometimes talk about artists as about kids, So they need support, they need to be taken care of, etc., etc. Don't think about bankers, for example, or lawyers from emerging markets. What the hell is this? So if you from emerging market, you can go to US university and get accepted, then to get a job in a big bank. So why is artists from emerging markets, they need to be taken care of? I understand. They can really have full access to the whole world. Art schools, they need money, of course, but a lot of artists in the UK also need money to be a part of the schools and promoted. I don't think it's an issue emerging markets versus not emerging markets. So in in my business, in my actually, if I'm dealing with art, I'm dealing with the artists who actually were born many years ago. So they're very old people now. So they completely different in terms of the now. But as contemporary artists, I know I have quite around few scholarships for Russian students working, not working, but studying in the UK, in the US, just to support them. That's it. So I believe once they're there from the big art schools, they know how the art market works actually. What the gallery are supposed to do, what the auction house. They're not so naive like kids. They need to be taken care of. So what in this case, I think over the years the difference between emerging market artists or established market artists, they're close like this. They don't need to be separated in a sense. So it's an artist's individual work. It's regional. It's individual work. So actually, the most of the Russian artists that they live outside Russia. They are Russian artists, but they live in Paris, New York, London, so they're not there anymore. So they're part of the community. If they want to work according to the standards, how its business is run there, it's here in the UK. It's just fine. They have to be part of this. So that's it.
So it kind of confuses us even further. I don't know if we addressed.
Yeah, it confuses.
So actually,
why confuses? No, it's very simple. So in terms of the support of the galleries working with the emerging markets, it's a different issue. But in terms of the artist itself, themselves, so this artist, they have no limitation. There is no barriers anymore. They're part of the global market.
Which is kind of an optimistic way to finish it.
That's have to be.
It's quite an optimistic way.
They have to be this way. They will not stay and say, okay, I'm a local artist, what I do. No, come on.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for. Unless, is there anything else? The last words you'd like to add? No. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the panelists, and hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.